Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos.
Perpetus watched through the dropship's viewport as FOB Horizon grew from a speck on the horizon into a sprawling military installation. His dorsal fin twitched with anticipation. His first posting with the legendary human forces. He'd studied their capabilities extensively during officer training, but seeing their raw power firsthand would be something else entirely. The landing pad's surface groaned under the dropship's weight as they touched down. Perpetus moved the hem of the atmospheric suit that strained tightly against the pectoral fins on his forearms and double-checked the seals. While humans could breathe the local air directly, his species required specific atmospheric conditions. Put simply, it wasn't wet enough. He could operate fine underwater, but for air it needed to be heavily foggy or his lung gills would dry out. A minor inconvenience, however, compared to the honor of this assignment. Commander David Lorwell waited at attention as Perpetus descended the ramp. The human stood perfectly still, radiating authority despite being nearly a head shorter than Perpetus. His steel-gray hair reflected the harsh sun above like a mirror, and only slightly less brightly than the cavalcade of medals and awards upon the upper portions of his spotless olive uniform.
"Welcome to Forward Operating Base Horizon, Lieutenant."
Lorwell's voice carried the weight of command, a weight reinforced by the prominent scar running along his tanned jawline.
"I trust your journey was comfortable."
"Yes, Commander. Thank you for—"
Perpetus's response cut short as movement caught his eye. A trio of human ground crew were casually unloading cargo modules from the dropship's hold. Each module weighed at least a quarter-ton, enough to require powered exosuits for his own species to move safely. Yet these humans handled them with nothing more than simple grip gloves and basic lifting harnesses.
"The barracks are this way, Lieutenant,"
Lorwell continued, politely ignoring Perpetus's wonderment as he spun in place and began walking with the measured precision of a veteran commander.
"You'll be assigned to Squad Leader Chavez for the duration of your deployment."
As they walked, Perpetus couldn't help cataloging more displays of casual human strength. A maintenance technician single-handedly lifting the corner of a light vehicle to check its undercarriage. A squad jogging past with full combat loads that would crush a member of his species. It was one thing to read reports about human physical capabilities. Seeing them in action was something else entirely.
"Your quarters have been specially equipped with atmospheric controls,"
Lorwell explained as they entered the barracks complex.
"Though I understand your species has no need for our sleep cycles, we've arranged the duty roster to accommodate."
"Of course, Commander."
Perpetus nodded, the long bottle of his upper and lower jaws creating vortices in the water of his helmet as he spoke. He was trying not to sound too impressed, but
"It's remarkable how your people maintain such strength despite devoting so much time to recreational unconsciousness."
Was that the slightest twitch at the corner of Lorwell's mouth? Before Perpetus could be sure, the commander had moved on to explaining base security protocols. They passed what appeared to be some kind of relaxation area. Rows of raised platforms topped with cushioning materials. Several humans lay completely motionless on those platforms. Perpetus had read about this, of course. The luxury of being so powerful that you could afford to regularly render yourself defenseless for hours at a time. His own species had evolved past such inefficiency aeons ago, but the humans did not need to. His comm unit chimed. A private message from Vigilax at FOB Valley. His fellow liaison had arrived at his posting 2 days prior. "Still excited about working with the great warriors, rookie?" Vigilax's text dripped with sarcasm. "Just wait until you see them waste half the day in their sleep chambers." Perpetus sent back a non-committal acknowledgement. Vigilax was always so cynical about everything. Sure, humans had their quirks, but their martial prowess was legendary for good reason.
"And this will be your squad."
Lorwell's voice drew his attention back to the present. They had reached what appeared to be a training area where a group of humans were engaged in close combat practice. Squad leader Rico Chavez broke away from the training group as Perpetus and Lorwell approached. His hair was cut in the same style as every other human on this base that Perpetus had seen, besides Commander Lorwell. Flat on the top and shaved on the sides, black in his case. His eyes were so dark a shade of brown that they almost matched his hair, and his skin was a dusty brown mostly occluded by his well-worn combat gear. Despite being covered in sweat, the human moved with an ease that belied the heft of his equipment. Perpetus also noted that, like many human warriors, Chavez had prominent combat scars. In this case, the feature they call a nose seemed slightly deformed or misshapen, as if it had been broken and reset dozens of times.
Sir!
Chavez acknowledged Lorwell with a crisp salute with his heavy, calloused right hand before turning to Perpetus.
Welcome to 3rd Squad, Lieutenant. Just finishing up some hand-to-hand drills.
In the training circle behind him, 2 humans circled each other with practiced wariness. Even through his atmosphere suit's sensors, Perpetus could feel the impacts as they exchanged blows. Each strike carried enough force to seriously injure one of his own species, yet these humans shrugged them off as part of routine practice.
The Lieutenant will be observing our operations,
Lorwell explained, his blue eyes conveying more to the squad leader than words ever could.
I trust you'll help him understand our protocols.
Of course, sir! Chavez nodded, acknowledging Lorwell's hidden meaning. Something in his tone suggested he'd done this before.
Miller! Torres! Wrap it up! We've got a briefing in 10!
The sparring humans immediately disengaged, helping each other up with casual strength. Neither seemed particularly affected by the brutal exchange they'd just concluded.
Vivier will want to check you over,
Chavez continued, gesturing to a human female approaching with a medical kit.
Standard procedure for all new arrivals.
Laura Vivier moved with the same efficient purpose Perpetus was beginning to recognize as characteristic of humans. Though uncharacteristically of them, she cut her hair differently from the rest, pulling its auburn threads back into a short and tight braid, instead of simply squaring it like a well-kempt kelp patch. Her attention seemed divided between the approaching briefing and one of the humans from the sparring match, who was moving with a slight limp. One of her arms shot out to point directly at them.
Torres, ice that knee before you make it worse,
she called out before turning to Perpetus.
Welcome aboard, Lieutenant. Let's make sure your atmospheric settings are properly calibrated while we have a moment.
Perpetus had to lean quite significantly to give her access to his suit's control panel, and took the time to observe that, unlike her squad leader, her uniform was pristine aside from her heavy worn boots. As she worked, Perpetus noticed another human stumbling slightly as they walked past. The human's movements were irregular, almost uncoordinated, nothing like the precise control he'd observed in the others.
Doctor,
he kept his voice low.
That soldier appears to be injured.
Laura glanced up, her expression shifting to concern.
Jensen, how long have you been up?
The human in question waved dismissively.
I'm fine, just need to finish inventory.
Like hell you are,
Laura interrupted, moving with startling speed to intercept the stumbling soldier.
You were on night watch, then volunteered for morning patrol, and I remember you doing morning yesterday too. That's nearly 30 hours without rest.
To Perpetus's shock, she physically restrained the larger human, who tried briefly to resist before seeming to deflate.
But the supply manifest,
Johnson protested weakly.
Can wait.
Laura's tone and accusing finger left no room for argument.
You're relieved. Get some sleep before you hurt yourself or someone else.
Perpetus watched in fascination as she efficiently marched the protesting human toward the barracks. Was this some kind of status ritual? Perhaps the stronger warriors earned more recreational time?
Briefing room's this way, Lieutenant,
Chavez interrupted his thoughts.
Commander Lorwell will want to outline tomorrow's operations.
The briefing room hummed with quiet conversation as 3rd Squad settled in. Perpetus's dorsal fin twitched slightly as he adjusted his tail frame to the human-sized seating. Through his atmosphere suit's transparent barrier, he noted how the squad unconsciously arranged themselves to accommodate their stronger members. Commander Lorwell's rigid frame cast a sharp shadow as he stepped to the front of the room. The overhead lights caught his scar as he activated the holographic display, bringing up a map of the surrounding region. His steel gray hair, cut to precise military regulations, didn't move at all as he turned to address them, and didn't reflect quite as brightly in here as it did outside.
Intel confirms the rebel forces have established a presence in these sectors.
His voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade, deep crow's feet accentuated by the light hanging above him as he focused on the tactical overlay.
Their primary objective appears to be disrupting mineral extraction operations in the western quadrant.
Perpetus studied both the map and the commander's movements. Every step Lorwell took was deliberate, the practiced precision of decades of authority.
Third Squad will coordinate with our liaison forces to establish a security perimeter here.
Lorwell highlighted a section of the map with one of his hands, scarred as well.
We expect the rebels to probe our defenses within the next 48 hours.
Squad leader Chavez leaned forward slightly, his compact but muscular frame somehow making the standard-issue chair look comfortable. Perpetus's frame, though tall, sat awkwardly in the human-designed plastic seats. Shifting uncomfortably, he asked,
"Rules of engagement, sir?" "Minimal collateral damage. We're here to protect infrastructure and civilians, not level city blocks."
Lorwell's expression hardened, pulling tight his aged and mottled skin.
"But make no mistake, these rebels have already demonstrated their willingness to employ extreme measures. Stay alert."
The briefing continued with detailed assignments and patrol schedules. Perpetus's fins rippled with interest at the precision of the planning, though he noticed strange gaps in the rotation. His dark eyes narrowed as he considered whether these represented the humans' recreational periods. The commander's gaze swept the room with practiced authority, light glinting off his precisely trimmed gray hair.
"We move at 0600 tomorrow. I expect everyone to be combat ready, which means following proper rest protocols. No exceptions."
His tone carried the same gravity he'd used discussing enemy capabilities and strategic objectives. Perpetus found it fascinating how humans treated their recreational periods with such military precision.
"That is all,"
Lorwell concluded, standing somehow even straighter.
"Dismissed. Rest well. Tomorrow we remind these rebels why attacking human installations is a terminal mistake."
As the squad filed out, Perpetus noticed Laura's athletic frame escort another tired-looking human toward the barracks, her auburn braid swaying with her purposeful stride. Such luxury, he thought, his fins rippling slightly, to be powerful enough to afford regular periods of complete vulnerability. Watching these legendary warriors choose to temporarily surrender consciousness was oddly inspiring. If they could be so frivolous, surely he could as well whilst among them.
"Lieutenant!"
Lorwell's voice drew his attention back, those sharp blue eyes fixing on him.
"You'll be integrated into 3rd Squad's shift. Chavez will handle the specifics."
His comm unit buzzed again as he followed Chavez's squad to their smaller briefing room. Another message from Vigilax, audio-visual rather than text this time, and whose darker blue-gray coloring and battle-scarred fins marked him as more experienced.
"Second day here. Still can't believe we're expected to plan operations around their sleep schedule. What kind of elite fighting force stops for nap time?"
But Perpetus didn't respond immediately. He was more interested in watching Chavez's calloused hands gesture as he discussed tactical options with the squad in their private briefing, making casual references to feats of strength his species would consider extraordinary. Moving heavy equipment, breaching reinforced doors, engaging multiple opponents in close combat. He activated his comm unit, meaning to share his observations with Vigilax, but paused as he watched Chavez stride past, moving with a casual grace that belied his obvious strength. Something about the way Lorwell had emphasized rest protocols suggested there was more to understand about human combat doctrine than he'd initially assumed. The morning sun cast long shadows across FOB Horizon's perimeter as Third Squad prepared for their first patrol. Perpetus watched Chavez inspect his troops, the squad leader's practiced eye missing nothing despite the darkness of the early hour.
"Gear check,"
Chavez called out, his crooked nose wrinkling as he spotted a loose strap on Private Chen's combat harness.
"Fix that before we move out."
Perpetus's dark eyes tracked the massive weight of equipment each human carried. Combat armor that would see a member of his species exhausted after a handful of steps. Weapons that would dislocate his shoulder if he tried to fire them. Yet these humans moved as if unburdened, checking weapons and adjusting gear with casual efficiency.
Lieutenant?
Laura approached, medical kit strapped across her athletic frame.
A word before we head out?
He noted how her sharp green eyes studied him through his atmosphere suit as she continued.
I've been reviewing xenobiology reports. Your species' cardiovascular system isn't well suited to prolonged ground operations. Don't push yourself trying to match our pace.
Perpetus's fins rippled with mild irritation.
I assure you, Doctor, I have no inclination of resting like...
A burst of comm chatter cut him off.
"Contact! Rebel forces engaged at Extraction Site 7.
Chavez was moving before the transmission ended, his compact frame coiled with controlled energy.
"Third Squad, mount up! Lieutenant, you're with me!"
The transport suspension groaned as they piled in, the humans' combined weight and gear threatening to overwhelm its compensators. Perpetus found himself next to Laura, who was already prepping medical supplies.
Site 7's a processing facility,
she explained, auburn braid swinging as the transport lurched into motion.
Mostly automated, minimal civilian presence.
The facility came into view as they crested a ridge. Smoke rose from several buildings, and weapons fire echoed across the complex. Perpetus counted at least 20 rebels engaging the security forces, but likely more hidden in the cover.
"Drop point in 30!
Chavez's voice carried over the engine noise.
"Remember, we need that infrastructure intact!"
The humans moved with practiced coordination as they dismounted, taking positions with smooth efficiency. Perpetus watched in fascination as they advanced through the facility. Their raw strength was impressive enough, casually smashing through obstacles that would require heavy equipment for his species. But it was their precision that truly stood out. Every movement calculated, every shot placed with care to minimize collateral damage and avoid civilian casualty. He witnessed Private Miller, who he'd seen sparring just yesterday, physically kick a reinforced door off its frame to reach trapped security personnel. Sergeant Torres provided covering fire with a weapon that would have broken Perpetus's wrist at a pull of the trigger. The rebels clearly hadn't expected such overwhelming force. Within 20 minutes, the survivors were in custody and medics were treating the wounded.
"Good work, people!"
Chavez surveyed the scene, unconsciously rubbing his scarred knuckles.
"But stay sharp. This was too easy."
Perpetus had to agree. The rebels had poor positioning, minimal coordination, almost as if...
"Sir!"
Chen's voice crackled over the comm.
Multiple hostile signatures approaching from the south. Much larger force.
Perpetus's fins rippled with understanding. This had been a feint, designed to draw out the response force. Now the real attack was beginning. He looked to Chavez, expecting to see concern, but the squad leader merely smiled grimly, those battle-earned scars stretching slightly.
"Right on schedule."
Chavez checked his weapon.
"They never learn. Third Squad, defensive positions. Let's show them why you don't pick fights with us."
The rebels had brought everything this time. Armored vehicles, heavy weapons, at least 100 fighters. They'd clearly been planning this assault for weeks. None of it seemed to concern Third Squad. Perpetus watched in amazement as the humans methodically dismantled the rebel advance. Torres dropped a heavy gunner with a shot that threaded between two buildings. Miller and Chen worked in perfect synchronization, using their raw strength to move shipping containers into defensive positions that would have required machinery for most species. Laura worked tirelessly, darting between positions to treat injuries while somehow maintaining perfect battlefield awareness. Twice she tackled soldiers clear of incoming fire before they'd even noticed the threat. But as the hours wore on, Perpetus began noticing subtle changes in the humans' performance. Their movements, while still incredibly powerful, lost some of their earlier precision. Response times slowed fractionally. Even Chavez seemed to be blinking more frequently as he coordinated the defense.
Sir!
Perpetus's dark eyes tracked another group of rebels trying to flank their position.
Their numbers are beginning to thin, but I'm detecting some kind of biological effect on our forces. Perhaps a chemical weapon?
Chavez's tired grin looked strange combined with his crooked nose.
Nah, Lieutenant. Just been a long day. We've been at this for...
He checked his chronometer.
14 hours now.
Before Perpetus could respond, his comm unit chimed. Time for his scheduled check-in with command. He'd already missed one due to the combat intensity.
This is Commander Eternalus.
The voice of his superior cracked through.
Report status, Lieutenant.
Sir, engaged significant rebel force at Extraction Site 7. Humans performing admirably, but showing signs of... Incoming!
Miller's shout cut through the transmission. 3 rebel vehicles had broken through the outer perimeter, engines screaming as they charged the defensive line. Perpetus watched in shock as Laura pulled an unresponsive Chen out of the vehicle's path. The private hadn't just been a bit less than responsive. He didn't even seem to notice until after Laura pulled him, almost as if...
Sorry, sir. Must cut transmission. Situation requires immediate attention.
Perpetus clicked off his comm before Eternalus could respond. Something was wrong with the humans, and he needed to find out what before it got worse.
Doctor!
He called to Laura as she finished moving Chen to safety.
I need to speak with you about...
The distinctive whine of rebel dropships cut him off. The enemy had committed their reserves, and they were coming in fast. Chavez was already shouting orders, redirecting the squad to meet this new threat. Whatever was affecting the humans would have to wait. But as Perpetus watched them move to defensive positions, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this long day was far more significant than he'd initially assumed. Perpetus found Laura triaging wounded in a makeshift aid station that established behind the defensive line. Her normally pristine uniform was stained with blood and grease. Her auburn braid was coming loose, but her movements remained purposeful as she worked, if a bit more sluggish than 14 hours ago.
Doctor!
His fins rippled with concern as he approached.
I believe there may be some kind of biological attack in progress. Multiple squad members are showing signs of...
Not now, Lieutenant,
she interrupted, sharp green eyes focused on applying a pressure seal to a security officer's wound.
Unless you're here to help, I need to focus.
A rebel mortar impact shook the building. Through the window, Perpetus could see 3rd Squad still holding the line, but their movements were increasingly uncoordinated. Even Chavez had lost some of his usual fluid grace.
Doctor, please!
Perpetus persisted.
If there's some kind of toxin...
It's not a toxin,
Laura snapped, finally looking up at him.
It's sleep deprivation. They need rest.
Perpetus's fins went completely still.
I don't understand. Humans choose to sleep for recreation. Surely in combat...
Recreation?
Laura actually laughed, though there was no humor in it.
Lieutenant, sleep isn't optional for humans. It's a biological necessity. Our brains require regular unconscious periods to process information and repair cellular damage. Go too long without it, and we start to lose cognitive function, motor control. Eventually, our bodies shut down entirely.
Another explosion rocked the building. Laura was already moving toward the sound, medical kit in hand.
But that's...
Perpetus followed her, mind reeling.
That's impossible! You're the most powerful species in the galaxy. How could you have such a critical vulnerability?
That power comes with a cost,
she called over her shoulder.
Our strength, our speed, our processing capacity. It all requires intensive maintenance. Sleep isn't a luxury, it's how we remain functional. There's hardly anything on Earth that doesn't sleep.
They reached a section of collapsed wall where Miller was helping Torres out of the rubble. The sergeant's movements were sluggish, unfocused.
How long?
Perpetus asked quietly.
Since we last slept, about 20 hours now.
Laura checked Torres for injuries while speaking.
Under normal conditions, humans need approximately 8 hours of sleep per 24-hour cycle. We can push past that in emergencies, but performance degrades rapidly after 16 hours of continuous activity.
Perpetus's dark eyes widened as the implications hit him. The strange gaps in patrol schedules, Lorwell's emphasis on rest protocols, the incident with Jensen. His comm unit chimed. Another check-in from Etanalis. But before he could answer, Chavez's voice crackled over the tactical channel.
All units, fall back to secondary positions. They're bringing up heavy artillery, and we don't have the coverage to...
The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Perpetus looked to Laura, seeing his own concern reflected in her tired eyes.
Go,
she said, already turning back to her patients.
I'll get the wounded clear. Just try to keep them alive until relief arrives.
Perpetus moved to rejoin the squad, his fins rippling with newfound worry. His own species had evolved no need for sleep cycles, yes, but they had never achieved anything close to human levels of physical capability. Now he understood why. As the sun began to set, Perpetus finally had a moment to make his delayed report. The rebels had pulled back to regroup, leaving 3rd Squad time to consolidate their position and tend to their wounded.
Lieutenant!
Etanalis' voice carried both authority and irritation through the comm.
Explain your earlier disconnection.
Perpetus watched Chavez organize the defensive perimeter, the squad leader's movements notably slower than that morning.
Sir, I've discovered something critical about human combat capabilities. They require regular periods of unconsciousness to...
Found that amusing, did you?
Etanalis interrupted. His silver-blue coloring would be showing clearly through his atmosphere suit as he drew himself up to his full height.
Yes, their recreational habits are quite peculiar, but focus on relevant tactical information.
Sir, you don't understand. It's not recreation, it's...
A proximity alarm cut through the night.
Lieutenant, report!
Etanalis demanded.
Enemy forces incoming!
Perpetus' fins rippled as he tracked the movements.
Sir, the humans have been awake for over 20 hours. Their combat effectiveness is severely degraded.
Ridiculous,
Etanalis scoffed.
These are human warriors, the galaxy's dominant military force. Their effectiveness does not degrade from so paltry a foe as time. I am cutting off this transmission. I will contact you again when you've had time to grow past your flights of fancy.
Perpetus sighed with resignation as the feed cut, and he returned to aiding his beleaguered comrades in the defense. After the battle at Extraction Site 7, 3rd Squad returned to FOB Horizon for their scheduled night shift. Perpetus watched with newfound interest as the entire squad immediately headed for the barracks upon arrival, even Chavez trading his usual casual stride for a direct line to his bunk. Their exhaustion from that battle must have been severe. Through the next day, Perpetus studied the base's operational rhythm. Shifts changed like clockwork every 12 hours, well before human performance began to degrade. The day shift troops handled patrols and standard operations, while 3rd Squad and the other night units rested. As sunset approached, 3rd Squad emerged from the barracks looking refreshed and ready. Chavez's crooked nose wrinkled slightly as he breathed in the evening air, checking his gear with renewed precision. That's when the proximity alarms went off.
Multiple hostile signatures approaching from the north,
the command center broadcasted.
All units, battle stations.
3rd Squad moved with fluid efficiency, taking up defensive positions they'd already drilled countless times. Behind them, Perpetus could hear the day shift forces awakening and preparing for combat, protected by the fresh night troops already on the wall. Private Jackson demonstrated exactly what fresh meant for a human warrior. His movements were precise and powerful as he engaged the first wave of rebels, who'd clearly expected to find a sleeping garrison. 3 insurgents went down in rapid succession to strikes that would have pulped Perpetus's bones had they connected. His comm unit buzzed. Vigilax again. "Are you seeing this?" His fellow liaison's message read. "They're hitting multiple facilities, thinking to catch humans in their rest period. The fools actually believe..." Another explosion drowned out Perpetus's reply. Through the smoke, he saw more rebel forces trying to breach their perimeter. But they faced not just Third Squad now. The entire base had roused to combat readiness, day shift troops joining the defense in waves as they geared up. The rebels had hoped to catch the humans at their weakest. Instead, they faced an entire garrison operating at peak efficiency. That's when Perpetus finally understood. This wasn't just about managing fatigue. The humans had turned their need for sleep into a tactical advantage, ensuring there were always fresh troops ready to respond at a moment's notice.
"They've overextended,"
Chavez observed, studying the rebel movements through his rifle scope.
"Pushed too far forward, thinking we'd be vulnerable. They must have thought that fight at 7 was a win for them."
Their mistake.
Laura appeared beside them, medical kit swinging.
Command's already mobilizing for a dawn counterattack.
"Good."
Chavez nodded, unconsciously rubbing his scarred knuckles.
"Third Squad, advance. Let's make sure none of them slip away before morning."
Perpetus watched the rebels realize their error too late, now caught between FOB Horizon's walls and the coming dawn. They'd just learned a costly lesson about human defensive capabilities, and in a few hours, they'd learn an even harsher one about human offensive power. Dawn painted FOB Horizon's walls in shades of red as the counterattack began. Perpetus watched the human forces deploy with mechanical precision. Night shift troops who'd been holding the line all evening now providing cover fire, while the fresh day shift spearheaded the assault. His comm unit chimed. Vigilax again. "These rebels are pathetic." His fellow liaison's message dripped with disdain. "Getting routed by humans who just woke up? My squad will show them how real warriors fight." "Wait!" Perpetus tried to warn him. "The day shift isn't just waking up, there!" But Vigilax had already closed the channel. Through his atmosphere suits and enhanced optics, Perpetus could see his colleague's squad advancing aggressively on the rebels' flank, clearly intending to outpace the human forces.
"Lieutenant!"
Chavez's voice pulled his attention back.
"Your friend's making a mistake."
"He doesn't understand."
Perpetus's fins rippled with worry.
"He thinks the humans are operating at reduced capacity."
Chavez just nodded.
"Third Squad, advance. Keep pace with the 1st and 2nd. Lieutenant, stick close. This is about to get messy."
The human counterattack moved like a well-oiled machine. Fresh troops pressed forward while Night Shift provided supporting fire, each element covering the other's movements. The rebels, caught between FOB Horizon's walls and the now flanking forces, began to break. That's when Vigilax made his fatal error. "Watch how it's done." His final message flashed across Perpetus's HUD. "We'll show these humans what real stamina looks like." Vigilax's squad charged straight into the rebels' main force, attempting to break their center before the humans could claim the victory. It was the sort of aggressive maneuver their species was known for, and exactly the wrong move.
"Vigilax, stop!"
Perpetus called over the comm.
"The day shift troops aren't tired. They've been resting all night. They're at full strength and..."
The explosion cut him off. The rebels, desperate and cornered, had rigged their fallback position with demolition charges. Vigilax's squad, overextended and unsupported, took the full brunt of the blast.
"Third Squad, covering fire!"
Chavez was already moving.
"Lieutenant, with me!"
They fought their way towards Vigilax's position, but Perpetus already knew they'd be too late. His colleague's aggressive charge had left his squad exposed on 3 sides. The rebels, seeing an opportunity, concentrated their remaining firepower on the isolated unit. Perpetus watched helplessly as Vigilax fell, The veteran officer's dark blue-gray coloring stained darker still. His squad tried to withdraw, but caught between rebel fire and unstable rubble, they had nowhere to go.
We have to fall back.
Chavez grabbed Perpetus's arm as another explosion rocked the area.
There's nothing more we can do here.
Perpetus allowed himself to be pulled away, his fins lying flat against his head. He tried to warn them, tried to explain that human combat effectiveness wasn't about constant endurance, but mutual support. Vigilax had died still believing humans were somehow weaker for requiring rest. The rest of the battle passed in a blur of tactical precision and overwhelming force. The rebels, already broken by the dawn assault, couldn't withstand the combined pressure of fresh human troops. By mid-morning, it was over. Perpetus stood in Commander Lorwell's office, his atmosphere suit still bearing scorch marks from the fighting. The commander's rigid posture hadn't wavered, despite the long hours, his steel-gray hair still regulation perfect.
Your report?
Lorwell's sharp blue eyes fixed on him, scar stark against his jaw in the morning light.
Complete victory, sir. Rebel forces have been routed from all facilities in the sector. Extraction operations can resume within 48 hours.
Lorwell nodded.
And your assessment of 3rd Squad's performance?
Perpetus's fins rippled slightly as he chose his words.
Exemplary, sir. Your rotation system is most effective.
Indeed.
The ghost of a smile touching Lorwell's stern features.
You understand now, I trust?
Yes, sir. I believe I do.
His comm unit chimed, the call he'd been dreading. Lorwell gestured for him to take it.
Lieutenant!
Atanalis's massive form filled the holographic display, his pale silver-blue coloring reflecting his authority.
I've reviewed the preliminary battle reports. This loss of Vigilax and his squad is concerning.
Sir,
Most concerning indeed,
Atanalis continued.
To think our finest warriors fell, while humans who'd just risen from their recreational period claimed victory. Clearly, we must reassess our tactical doctrine.
Perpetus opened his mouth to explain, about sleep cycles, about human biology, about the careful rotation of fresh troops, but he stopped himself. Let them think humans were so powerful they could afford to sleep. Let them believe humanity's greatest weakness was actually a sign of strength. The truth would only make them underestimate humans further, and he'd seen firsthand how deadly that mistake could be.
Yes, sir, he said instead. I've learned much about human combat capabilities. With your permission, I'd like to remain with 3rd Squad to study their methods further.
Granted.
Atanalis's expression was unreadable through his atmosphere suit.
Perhaps you can help us understand how they maintain such effectiveness despite their peculiar habits.
The transmission ended. Perpetus turned back to Lorwell, who had watched the exchange in silence.
You didn't correct his assumption,
the commander observed.
No, sir. Some truths are better learned through experience than explanation.
Lorwell's scar twisted slightly as he smiled. A real smile this time.
Welcome to 3rd Squad, Lieutenant. Get some rest. You've got the night shift.